Borrowed thinking, the question that changes everything. The most dangerous thoughts you'll ever have may not feel dangerous at all, because the thoughts that shape your life most rarely arrive as thoughts. They arrive as, that's just the way things are. This is normal. Everyone knows that. We've always done it this way. And because you've heard them for so long, they stop sounding like opinions. They begin sounding like reality. But here's a question, one simple question. How many of your beliefs did you actually choose? Not defend, not repeat, not inherit, choose. Take a moment, think about it, because your answer is probably much smaller than you imagine. When you were born, your mind wasn't empty, it was ready. Ready to learn language, ready to recognize faces, ready to imitate, ready to belong. Before you understood politics, you absorbed political attitudes. Before you understood success, you absorbed ideas about money. Before you understood relationships, like you watched them. Before you understood fear, you borrowed it. No one handed you a manual. Life became the manual. And page by page, your mental operating system began installing itself. You probably don't remember the first time someone taught you what success looked like, or who deserved trust, or what love was supposed to feel like. You don't remember because you weren't evaluating. You were absorbing like a sponge, like every child does. Not because children are naive, because that's exactly how human learning works. And here's the fascinating part. The brain isn't making a mistake. It's doing exactly what evolution designed it to do. Because for most of human history, questioning everything wasn't an advantage. Learning quickly was. Belonging kept you alive. Isolation often didn't. Your first classroom wasn't school, it was observation. And that's where the story begins. Not with information, with imitation. The invisible teachers. You probably don't remember the first belief you ever borrowed. Not because it wasn't important, because it happened before you knew it was happening. Imagine walking into a library before you could read. You wouldn't choose the books. You wouldn't question the shelves. You wouldn't compare one idea against another. You would simply accept that whatever surrounded you must be normal. That's childhood. Long before we learn to think, we learn what thinking looks like. A child doesn't discover the world alone. They borrow it. They borrow language, they borrow expressions, they borrow fears, they borrow ambitions, they borrow assumptions, and perhaps most importantly, they borrow certainty. Watch a young child for just a few minutes. They don't ask, is this belief supported by evidence? They ask, is this how my family sees the world? Because belonging comes before reasoning. It has to. For thousands of generations, survival depended on learning quickly from the people closest to you. Questioning every lesson wasn't adaptive, imitating was. Psychologists have spent decades studying how children learn, and one of the clearest findings is that children don't simply copy behavior. They absorb patterns, expectations, and emotional responses from the people around them. When a parent reacts with curiosity, curiosity becomes familiar. When a parent reacts with fear, fear can become familiar too. The same is true for confidence, conflict, money, success, failure, trust, even silence. Children often inherit emotional patterns long before they understand the words that describe them. Think about that for a moment. Before you ever decided what success meant, someone showed you. Before you decided what love looked like, you watched it. Before you developed opinions about work, money, education, failure, or ambition, you experienced someone else's version first. Not because they intended to control you, because every adult is teaching all the time, especially when they don't realize they're teaching. Here's what's fascinating. The people who shaped you the most were rarely giving speeches. They were living ordinary Tuesday afternoons. How they handled disappointment, how they spoke
Could we
about
have the
strangers,
breadbasket, please?
how they treated waiters, how they celebrated success, how they argued, how they apologized or didn't. Those ordinary
It
moments
really was just a
quietly
Tuesday thing.
became lessons. Not written in a textbook, written into your nervous system. This is what I call mental inheritance. And here's the part that surprised me most while researching this episode. Mental inheritance doesn't stop when childhood ends. It simply changes teachers, school, friends, television, news, social media, advertising, algorithms. Every environment continues asking the same silent question: will you adopt this way of seeing the world? Most of the time, we never hear the question. We only notice the answer. Because the most influential teachers in your life may never know they were teaching you. And the most important lessons you've ever learned may never have been spoken out loud. Which leads to an even more uncomfortable realization. If your first teachers shaped your thinking, who's teaching your mind today? The world is still teaching you. If this story ended with childhood, it would be comforting. We could blame our parents, our teachers, our environment, and move on, but the story doesn't end there because something else quietly took their place. The world, not one person, not one institution, an entire ecosystem competing for one thing: your attention. And wherever your attention goes, your thinking slowly follows. Every day, thousands of invisible decisions are made before you make a single visible one. The headline you read, the video you click, the comment you remember, the advertisement you barely noticed, the recommendation that appeared at exactly the right moment. None of them seem important until you realize they're all pulling on the same thread: your perception. Here's something remarkable. Your brain isn't recording reality like a camera. It's constantly predicting reality before it fully experiences it. Think about driving home from work. Have you ever arrived in your driveway and realized you barely remember the drive? You weren't unconscious. Your brain was relying on patterns it had learned thousands of times before. Prediction saves energy. Your mind is doing this all day. It predicts conversations. It predicts danger. It predicts success. It predicts failure. Most of the time, those predictions are incredibly useful. But they come with a hidden cost. If your predictions were built on borrowed assumptions, you may spend years expecting outcomes that were never inevitable. The brain prefers familiarity, even when familiarity isn't serving you. That's one reason people stay in unhealthy relationships, remain in careers they've outgrown, avoid opportunities they've dreamed about for years. Not because change is impossible, because the familiar feels safer than the unknown. I call this cognitive gravity. The longer an idea remains unchallenged, the stronger its pull becomes. Not because it's true, because it's familiar, and familiarity has extraordinary power. Psychologists have demonstrated something both simple and unsettling. When people encounter the same statement repeatedly, they're often more likely to judge it as true later, even if the statement isn't supported by evidence. Not because repetition magically creates truth, it doesn't, but because repetition creates familiarity. And familiarity can influence how believable something feels. Marketers understand this. Political campaigns understand this. Media organizations understand this. Social platforms understand this. And today, algorithms understand it better than anyone. Every recommendation you receive is based on patterns. What held your attention yesterday? What people similar to you clicked? What keeps you engaged just a little longer? Recommendation systems are incredibly useful. They help us discover books we'll enjoy, music we'd never find, teachers who change our lives, but there's a trade-off. The more accurately a system predicts what you'll engage with, the less often it introduces perspectives that challenge you. Without intending to, your world can become increasingly familiar, not because someone planned it, because prediction optimizes for engagement, and engagement often rewards familiarity. Over time, the feed begins to feel like reality itself, not because it is reality, because it's the reality you've been shown most often. This isn't just a technology story, it's a human story. Long before algorithms existed, people naturally gathered with those who shared similar values, experiences, and beliefs. Algorithms didn't invent this tendency, they amplified it. The challenge isn't that influence exists. Influence has always existed. The challenge is remembering that what feels obvious to you may simply be what you've encountered most often. That's why intelligent people can disagree so passionately, not because one side lacks intelligence, but because they've been trained by different experiences, different environments, different stories, different worlds. And if we're honest, every one of us is living inside a version of reality shaped by what we've repeatedly seen, heard, and experienced. Which leads to a question that's difficult, but incredibly freeing. If your mind is constantly learning from the world around you, who gets to decide which parts of that world deserve to shape you? If everything we've explored so far is true, you might be wondering something uncomfortable. If so much of my thinking was inherited, then who am I? It's a fair question, but it's also the wrong one. Because this episode isn't about proving that your thoughts aren't yours. It's about showing that they can become yours. There is an important difference. Mental inheritance is not a life sentence. It's a starting point. Think about learning to write. At first, every letter is copied. Every word is borrowed. Every sentence follows someone else's rules. No one criticizes a child for tracing letters. Because tracing isn't failure, it's how mastery begins. Thinking works the same way. Every mind begins by borrowing. Extraordinary minds eventually begin editing. That is the difference. The people we admire most didn't arrive in the world with better brains. They developed a better relationship with their own thinking. They learned to pause before accepting an idea simply because it felt familiar. They became curious about the invisible architecture of their own mind. And curiosity is where freedom begins, not certainty, curiosity. Because curiosity asks a question, borrowed thinking never asks. What if I'm wrong? Not as an attack, as an invitation to grow, an invitation to investigate, an invitation to become the author instead of merely the editor of your own mind. This is what I call thought ownership. Thought ownership doesn't mean rejecting everything you've been taught. It doesn't mean becoming suspicious of everyone. It doesn't mean believing the opposite simply because it's different. That's not independent thinking. That's reaction. Thought ownership is quieter than that. It begins with a simple habit. Whenever you encounter a belief that feels unquestionably true, pause. Ask yourself, where did I first learn this? Then ask, what evidence keeps this belief alive today? And finally, if I had been born somewhere else, raised by different people, or lived in another culture, would I still believe this? Sometimes the answer will be yes, and your belief becomes stronger because you've examined it. Other times, you'll discover that what felt like certainty was simply familiarity wearing the mask of truth. That's not weakness, that's growth, because every time you examine one belief, you're doing something extraordinary. You're updating your mental operating system, not deleting who you are, refining who you're becoming. Neuroscience has shown us something deeply hopeful. The brain remains capable of change throughout life. New experiences, new learning, new habits, and meaningful reflection can reshape neural pathways over time. You're not trapped inside the first version of yourself. You're constantly rewriting it. One conversation, one book, one difficult question, one honest reflection at a time. That's why awareness matters so much, because you can't rewrite code you don't know is running. Imagine buying an old house. At first, you accept everything exactly as you found it. The walls, the wiring, the floor plan. Then one day, you discover parts of the foundation need attention. You don't burn the house down. You renovate it carefully, intentionally, keeping what is strong, replacing what no longer serves you. Your mind deserves the same care. Not every inherited belief needs to be removed. Many deserve to be protected. Compassion, integrity, curiosity, kindness, perseverance. These are inheritances worth preserving. Wisdom isn't throwing away everything you've inherited. Wisdom is learning what to keep, what to question, and what to rebuild. Because the goal was never to think differently for the sake of being different. The goal is to think more intentionally, to become someone whose beliefs are chosen, not merely inherited. And once you begin doing that, something remarkable happens. The world doesn't change, you do. And when you change, the world begins to look different too. For the first time today, you're wondering which thoughts truly belong to you. Not because someone told you to question everything, but because you've started asking better questions. And that's where real change begins, not with certainty, with awareness. The goal of this episode was never to convince you that your beliefs are wrong. Many of them aren't. The goal was something much quieter, to remind you that every belief deserves the dignity of examination. Some ideas will become stronger because you tested them. Others will quietly fall away. Not because someone argued with you, because you finally saw them clearly. That is what growth looks like, not becoming someone else, becoming someone more intentional. The truth is, every one of us inherits a mental operating system from family, from culture, from school, from experience, from success, from failure, from the stories we were told and the stories we kept telling ourselves. None of us chooses where the journey begins, but every one of us can choose where it goes next. And maybe that's what freedom really is. Not thinking differently for the sake of being different, but becoming conscious enough to recognize the difference between the beliefs you inherited and the beliefs you've intentionally made your own. Because once you begin noticing borrowed thinking, you start noticing it everywhere. In conversations, in headlines, in advertising, in politics, in traditions, in fear, even in the quiet voice inside your own mind. And here's what I've discovered. The people who grow the most aren't the people who never change their minds. They're the people who care more about discovering the truth than protecting the comfort of being right. That takes courage, it takes humility, and it takes something increasingly rare, the willingness to pause before saying, that's just the way things are. Because maybe it isn't. Maybe it's simply the way you've always seen it. And once you realize that, an extraordinary opportunity appears. For the first time, you can begin choosing. Choosing what deserves to remain, choosing what deserves to be questioned, choosing what deserves to become part of the person you're still becoming. Not because someone else decided for you, because you did. The first truly original thought you'll ever have isn't a brand new idea. It's the moment you deciding to examine an old one. That single decision can quietly change everything that follows. Because better lives aren't built one giant breakthrough at a time. They're built one examined thought, one intentional decision, and one meaningful conversation at a time. This has been the 1% Think Differently. And today, we didn't begin by learning something new. We began by asking a different question. Because every transformation starts the same way, not with an answer, with a question. And that question leads us to the next step. If you've realized that some of your thoughts were inherited, the next question becomes unavoidable. Where did they come from? And more importantly, how many of them were never really yours to begin with? That's where our journey continues. Now that you've questioned whose thoughts you're thinking, the next question is even more unsettling. If your attention shapes your beliefs, who controls your attention? Episode 2, Attention is Currency.